Well, hello there you lovely patrons on Patreon, and welcome to the longer version with Mikey commentary of the Hinata fan art piece we did just earlier at the weekend. So I thought I'd actually just talk a bit about the drawing style and what's going on, because you already know why I was drawing it and who I was angry at, YouTube. Basically doing the framework process that I talk about with most of my tutorials: a circle for the head, drop the face off of the bottom, use the basic curves and building blocks of a character to get the pose in, and when it comes to characters that are quite busty, get a high angle on there or get them to lean forward, and you're going to make the most out of the goods when it comes to a visually interesting artistic image. Once I've got the framework down, I went straight into getting the hair out the way, and with Hinata's original design from Naruto, she's got a very simple, clean hairline, so I wanted to break that up a lot more and show that this character's in some kind of friction, some kind of action, and put a lot more life into the pose, because they're a little bit lifeless with some of those character designs in Naruto. Not that I'm hating. So in this one, I got myself a really quick rough sketch idea layer down, went into a black kind of air quotes final ink layer to actually start to finalize some of these strands of hair and work out what's going on, because you can sketch loads of loose hair designs all down to get a feel for things, but when you're kind of putting in a final line, that's when you have to kind of work out which area's hair, which area's space, and all the gaps and so on. You'll notice with this design at one point I still had the hoodie coming in and covering just the very ends of the breasts, essentially kind of holding everything into place for this design, but when I went into a next layer, I actually realised it wasn't quite going to work. It looked a little bit too unnatural to have that final layer leaning forward. And also in this earlier design I had like maybe the straps around the legs, still some shrieking bags and stuff like that, and a few more bits floating on. But the main essence of it was there. So had myself a night's sleep, came away from it and came in fresh to do a proper final inking layer now, because the last one wasn't quite sharp enough. So using a 0.14 size nib on Photoshop with a high level of hardness, pretty much like 95% hardness, careful, and making sure that the pressure level was turned off so that it was a thinner line if I didn't really press it too hard, but it was always going to be pure black. It wasn't going to be a lighter grey layer instead. And the first thing, as you can see, I worked on was just the hair. I didn't want to get confused by the rest of the pose, because I really needed to make sure all of these strands and flow of hair was correct, and I did my best to get lots of sweeping gestures. So I wasn't trying to perfectly trace the hair from the layer below, as you can see. I was actually trying to get more smooth flowing gestures out of my hand, and then working back from there. Each time one of those like whips of the wrist actually worked, I'd keep that line and then move on to the next, which is why you can see me building them, deleting them and rebuilding them again, because when it comes to a flowing thing, you need a flow in the drawing style as well, otherwise it looks too static and the line gets too wobbly. So separate layer again. Now that I've got the hair out of the way, let's bust in and take a look at these features. Nose and eyes, plenty of eyelash, and it's always difficult to kind of work out for me. I tend to draw the eyes a little bit larger than I want to in my anime characters, and just thanks to the magic of technology I get to obviously resize it a little bit, jig them down, and just create the face into looking slightly more adult. Again, when it comes to the curves of a boob, they're very important. Again, trying to get those quick flowing lines until I actually get ones that work in the position and the curve that I want to. And when it comes to mapping out the boobs, you can see immediately I'd given up on the hoodie being around the front, and also been made sure to show how the flesh is kind of getting caught in a bit by the top of the kind of, I guess it's like a black bikini underwear thing she's wearing. So hand on one side, closed fist, get those hand skills down. You need to learn to draw your hands and feet on characters. It's a bugger, but it's always worth doing. I had no trouble with this side. I kind of knew what I wanted visually, and then once I started to get the material of the hoodie sleeve in, I got really light lines to show it has loads of folds and crumples to kind of contrast a little bit with the smoother lines of the flesh and the lines of the netting as well. As for the hand on the other side, I still wasn't sure if it was going to be holding a kunai or not, and once I'd finally given up on that, I was like, okay, sod it, I'm just going to look at some other hand reference and do a better version of just drawing the fingers, not completely in a fist, but tight it in. Had a couple goes, couldn't nail it, so I had to go back to the layer underneath, just sit down, redraw it properly, look at my own hand making that same position, and then get that final line layer on top. Because like for modes of people, getting hands in and getting hands correct is a real bugger, and you need to kind of get it right, otherwise it will just dog you for ages. Then I spent a load of time kind of procrastinating and troubling over the line work of the thighs, what position were the legs going to be in, was I still going to include that kind of satchel that's on the leg or not, and getting the right kind of curve that described the overall shape of the surface of the thigh. Eventually I managed to sack off the idea completely after a few false starts, keep the kind of bandaging around there because it's visually nice, it shows the curve of the leg and breaks up what would otherwise be an overall area of skin alone, because I did decide, screw it, I was going to make it quite ecchi for YouTube. No pants, no underwear. I was going to draw like some Hinata shorts on for one bit, and then I decided that getting the curves or the folds of material right where the hip tucks into the leg was just going to be too difficult. So I've got the body layer down, the face layer and the hair layer, get that netting layer on top as well. And the reason why I wanted to do this separately was because one, drawing the netting to follow the curves of the body was probably going to be a little bit of work. You want to get that correct because it really helps describe the shape, so you want that done well. Also because if I have it on its own layer, I could probably use some Photoshop tricks to show the material biting ever so slightly into the flesh by using some kind of layer blending properties like a shadow or just a glow, which is a darker skin tone. But once I'd got that out of the way, dropped off the original layer and just started to clean up the line work a little bit. This is a more boring part of the work, but super important. Just getting some darker line work in shadow. Once you get rid of the layer underneath as well, you're going to notice that you've missed a few gaps, that some of your lines are a little bit dirty, they don't quite cleanly meet up where they should do. And what you need to do, or personally when you draw in my technique, is create a perfectly sealed zone for each bit. So the hair layer might just stop because I've drawn it into the body, but on its own layer I need to go over the body line where it meets to create a perfectly encapsulated area, because it means when I start to go into the colour work, having done that for the hair, the body and so on, I can actually just immediately mask off different zones. It makes life easier. So I used one of the bottom-most preset brushes that comes in Photoshop, this kind of sponge shape, and just started to get some soft pastel tones going in the background. I kind of knew that it was going to be very vibrant and bright for the characters, so these kind of softer tones from light to dark would create quite a nice complementary sort of feel to things. And you can see straight away I'm able to just have a colour zone for the body, boom, straight away a colour zone for the hair. You'll notice there's some toning already because I've got the homework done on the line layer. I can just create this mapped zone immediately and use the gradient paintbrush tool from very dark blue to the tips to a kind of lighter grey-green blue at the top of the hair. I do the same thing for the skin ever so slightly, you can see, and for the bra and the leggings and the top. So my immediate base layer already describes a little bit of a shift in lights and dark and just kind of get some work done really quickly. So using that skin layer as the masking tool, I use a layer above to actually start to do the shadow. And I used to do a completely different technique, which I'll talk about the differences of someday down the line, but for the sake of speed, I'm trying to change up the game. So this time around, I got some darker skin tones going towards the red end of the spectrum so that it shows that kind of warmth and life and blood underneath, instead of just going too grey and flat. And did a layer in with a brush which had a fairly hard edge to show shadows, then went over with a really large soft edge brush to show the kind of smoother gradients of red over to the lighter tones on the boobs and over the cheeks and everything. You can see there's no hard edges there, it's just gradient in. And once I again went around the body with that, I went round again with a darker red tone and then just started to really kind of make these different areas pop, and then did the same thing again with purple, just for some particular areas to really kind of make it shine, really show that there's flushed blood up to the cheeks and so on as well. Cheeky bit of shadow line over the boob to show where the kind of bikini top actually is a straight line up to the neck. Little things like that really create a believable 3D shape to the body. And now I'm doing a secondary light source where I'm just kind of going into the shadow zones and just putting a bit of edge of light under the boob, bit of edge of light over the tips of the nose and over the side cheeks of the face and so on. I've got a very general rough light source, which is there's lots of ambient light and it's vaguely above for this character. I didn't want to pump loads of shadow because visually most of the focus is on the pose and what's going on. Getting the mouth in is a fairly simple bit of design, and getting the white of the eye in these days is never a perfect white, it's just a more white version of the skin tone. So what I've just done there is the special trick that changes my life. As you can see now, all of a sudden everything's got this weird kind of pop to it that it didn't have a minute ago. It's almost like you're looking at it through a slightly blurred sheet of glass, but the line work's still really sharp. So what I did is I duplicated all of the line work. I made a kind of slightly purple layer copy of that line work, and then I put it through a filter and I made it really filtered, really blurred, and left that line art layer on there, but changed the layer property from a normal layer, which is its default for painting on, onto a color burn layer instead, and left that underneath the original line art layer. I hope that makes sense. I will talk about that again in future, but that's what really all of a sudden has this softer, defocused feel about it. All of a sudden it's got a load more range and pop, and then all you have to do is some really simple work if you don't want to go too detailed afterwards, such as some really loose highlights over the top area, just a light blending layer to get some purple shading in. And now you can see I'm using the blending tools to get that netting layer back down, and just that each individual line of that netting glows ever so slightly with a kind of brown red skin tone. It's very low opacity, but it's there, and that's what kind of subtly makes it look like the netting is ever so slightly eating into the skin. Then I like a bit of light reflections. I always like a bit of triangle shaped light to show where the curved edge is picking up a light source, maybe combined with a few circles as well. Again, not going to pure levels of white anymore, but using a really soft white brush just to kind of slowly build that in. Then some SFX, because sound effects, I guess they're just 3D visual effects, but a few pops and things that you'll see in often common manga tropes to show action or experience. And then I thought I'd just float it up by throwing in a completely different colour that would help complement this whole picture. I've got some soft pastel tones in the background, none of them quite build up to green. I've almost got a full rainbow range of soft pastel tones in this image. So I made some leaves, coloured them in, super simple, duplicated them, sent some of them to the background layer and blurred them really heavily, and left some of them in the foreground layer a little bit larger to help give the piece all of that pop. Then I copied the Hinata piece herself, blurred it out, put it on top, and then cut away at that blur to create a sharper image at the front but leave a bit of a bump in back in this blurred state. So that in a power run are the techniques behind getting that kind of art style done. I do, as I mentioned, tend to work in slightly different ways depending on my mood or exploring different options. This I quite like because if you've followed the channel for a while, you'll know I had to go at some Hyperdimension Neptunia artwork and making that a bit more pastel and working a bit quicker, and now I'm kind of taking what I learned from those techniques and bringing it back to the slightly more traditional anime style and creating something that doesn't have me working for like 8 or 9 solid hours, has me working for something closer to 5 or 6. So we're slowly getting towards what is my target of a lovely piece of art in 3 hours, but we're still on the path. Thank you very much for following along. I hope you found this video to be helpful, you lovely patrons. This is of course a video which is unlisted on YouTube, which means it's only available to you lot here through Patreon by this link, so don't share it around if you don't mind. And other than that, if you've got any questions, of course you're welcome to get in the comments and let me know. I don't know if you can comment on this video on YouTube, but you can certainly get into Patreon and have an ask there. Your support means the world to me, it makes all of this possible, and I hope you guys have a lovely week. Take care.